Sarcoma Stories is a podcast created by Sarcoma Foundation of America to highlight the voices and experiences of patients, survivors, and care partners. After listening, be sure to join our Sarcoma Stories podcast Facebook group to connect with the community and discuss the episode. Follow us and enable notifications on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss new episodes. You can also find all episodes and information on this subtype or your subtype on SFA's website, curesarcoma.org. Links are in this episode's description. On this episode, we speak with Julie Harp, who shares her experience as a care partner to her son, Don, during his sarcoma journey and as he approached end of life. Julie offers a unique and powerful perspective on caring for an adult child through terminal illness. Julie reflects on Don's path to diagnosis, including misdiagnosis and the feeling of being lost within the medical system. She emphasizes the importance of self-advocacy and the need for better systems to help patients navigate the healthcare system and achieve timely care. She also shares how she continues to honor Don's legacy through her advocacy work, fighting for better awareness, research, and outcomes for sarcoma patients. With courage and compassion, Julie not only tells Don's story and her family's experience with sarcoma, but reminds us of the importance of being an audible voice for inaudible voices as we continue to push for better treatments and hope for all affected by sarcoma. In continued conversation with Julie after the podcast, Julie emphasized the importance of staying on top of the referral process, especially to oncologists or sarcoma centers, and continuing to advocate for yourself at every point of the sarcoma journey. It is vital for patients to feel empowered and avoid significant delays in their care. Julie and Don's story highlight this importance, and SFA is always here to be a resource if you yourself are feeling stuck. Julie, thank you for being such a fierce advocate for the sarcoma community and for sharing Don with us. To our audience, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and please excuse any minor background noise the audio may have picked up. Let's dive in. Welcome to Sarcoma Stories, and welcome back if you're a regular listener. My name is Tasha. I'm one of your hosts.
Hi, and I'm Brandy. I'm your other host.
And today we are joined by Julie Harp. Julie is here speaking with us from the care partner perspective. She guided her son Don through his sarcoma journey. And so, Julie, before we kick off with how Don's journey began, tell us a little bit about Don. Who was Don?
It's always difficult to put into words, right? Yeah. Describe someone that you haven't met face to face and in person. But Don was... the quickest way to describe him is one of the gentlest souls you would ever encounter. He was the oldest of our 3 children. He was the oldest of the grandchildren in our family. So he naturally was that leader, and he accepted that role. We leaned on him quite a bit, but he accepted that role well and fulfilled it. It's really interesting because I always tell everybody, Don, the thing you would notice about him first is he had this thick, dark hair, these bright blue eyes, this just genuine, captivating smile. But then the moment you actually went beyond those features and got to know him was the place that you held on to him and he held on to you. He was super warm, super genuine. It was really neat. We had a group of his friends send us adjectives that they would use to describe him. And looking at those were very meaningful to us because they used words like authentic, passionate, genuine, things that I feel like sounded so old, but yet were just so powerful. And those adjectives are things that we continue to lean on. So hilarious guy, had a wit about him that was really under the cover. He never drew a lot of attention to himself. He was one of those people that spoke softly, but was never looking for the spotlight at all. But one of the words that my husband always uses, he was definitely a man of principle, and he stood by that in everything he did. So loved people, loved life, was just joyful, always really joyful. So just a really unique, amazing guy.
I think there's no better compliment than you can get than somebody saying you're authentic.
Agree.
What a great thing to say about someone. And I think it speaks volumes about Dawn.
Yeah, thank you for sharing him with us. I think it's so special every time I get to speak with you and learn a little bit more about Don. And I didn't know about the Adjective Project with his friends. And I imagine hearing that reflected back to you. You know your son better than anybody, but to hear those adjectives reflected back to you is a cool way to see the impact you know he had on the world and hear it from the world around him. So, what an awesome project to have had his friends do and to have as a gift to continue on with.
Right. It's a great referral to go back to for us. That reminder of when you need those positive moments for us, those adjectives really played that positive role for us. Yeah.
Totally. And you mentioned Don had a bit of an old soul. So, how old was Don actually? And how old was he when his sarcoma journey began?
Don was 24 when his sarcoma journey began. That was in January of 22 when he received his official diagnosis. Prior to that, in December of 2021, he underwent a surgery that, as typical, right, in most sarcoma journeys, a misdiagnosis or a diagnosis that led us down one path. And then once that surgery was complete, is when we, weeks later, found his pathology report and got the confirmed diagnosis of sarcoma.
Can you talk about the misdiagnosis when you say you went down the wrong path?
Sure. I start with this every time now simply because I didn't know this. We didn't know this as a family, that there is no diagnostic testing for sarcoma. There, for Don, nothing showed up in blood work, all the things that as a person before this journey, I just lived into those, thinking those were the way everything got diagnosed. And Don didn't have the lump, the bump, any of those big symptoms, so to speak, if there are big glaring symptoms. He didn't have those. Looking back, the only thing he had was a little bit of fatigue, and he had a little bit of weight loss. But Don was in his first job, fresh out of college, working some crazy hours, and worked out every day. So kind of attributed those two things to, hey, this is where life is for us right now. But Don, again, this was December of 2020. Remember, COVID's hot and heavy. We're still in the middle of COVID world. And we had spent a weekend together as a family. So all eyes were on everybody. He felt great. He ate great. We did a ton of walking together that weekend. And he called us at the end of that weekend and said, I'm just not feeling right. I think I may have COVID. And typical Don fashion, his concern was for everybody he had been around because he had been with grandparents, extended family, and it was right when COVID was allowing you to start doing some things, but everybody was still very cautious. So his call to us was, oh, I think I have COVID. I've already talked to my work. And this is when you still had to schedule a COVID test. So he was scheduling a COVID test the next day. And amazingly, a few hours went by and he called us back and he said, something's just not right. I'm progressing quickly. This cough that I mentioned to you all is now progressing. I've just coughed up some blood-tinged mucus. It was not hemoptysis at this point. It was not coughing up blood. It was just, again, his thought was an aggravation from all the cough, you know. We discussed that. He went to an urgent care. He got to the urgent care and they were really good about, they did blood work, they did a chest x-ray, and were really leaning toward double pneumonia is what they thought at that point. But I'm very grateful for that physician because it was getting late in the night. Urgent care hours are winding up. And that physician was, I just don't want you to go home. I just don't feel good. I want you to go to an ER. So there was, again, I think, because of all of our heightened concerns of COVID, that physician was concerned enough. Went straight to an ER from there and went through more tests. Blood work was a little elevated, like he was fighting an infection. But again, no glaring signs of anything. Later that night, after several hours of testing, they did do some more chest imaging, no MRI at this point. And I want to say that because I want to encourage people that that's a huge piece to push for, that we did not realize at the time. So he did not have an MRI, but he had some chest imaging, and they came back and at that point said, there's a mass. There is a mass. We see this in the left atrial area of his heart, in the atrium. So we see a mass. Then this hospital wanted to send him to their bigger facility that really had the cardiothoracic team there. All of this to us made complete sense. We get to the larger facility and go through the ER, and then they just admit him and came to us and said that they really felt like, watching the imaging they had looked at, that Don had a myxoma. Myxoma is a benign cardiac tumor. When you read about cardiac tumors, they're rare to begin with, but the majority of them, I mean, like 90%, are benign. So again, all this seemed to make sense. And none of us are going worst case scenario, especially at 24. And that's another thing I want to point out, because that becomes a hurdle when you're young. So made the decision. Don was like, I want this out. The surgeon was like, yes, let's get it out. Did the surgery. So we had an open heart surgery, full open heart surgery, removed the tumor, and the surgeon came to us and said, I just want to send this off to be sure. I want to send the tissues off. And they did send it to one of our very well-known cancer pathology areas in the States. So we left the hospital in December of 2021 feeling phenomenal. Don pushed through. He was hilarious in his recovery of open heart surgery. He now had a great admiration for all the people that he once thought, oh, why is this such a big deal? So it was quite fun watching him try to compete, walking on the hallway with other patients that were twice his age. And and he laughed. He goes, Mom, they're kicking me. They're kicking my butt walking their maze. So we were fortunate in December of 2021. He made it home for Christmas. So we were feeling phenomenal. Honestly, we just thought, wow, how fortunate we were to catch this. All that was going great. I will say it's hard when you are in a hospital setting during the holidays. I do feel like we probably hit some lag time in there, and we got a call. And I think, again, it was hard because there's still a lot of COVID protocol. So Don got his news that he knew something was up because he got a call. He had taken his younger brother and sister to a movie and got a call and said, we need to talk to you tonight. So he left the movie, called his dad and I. We made sure we were all home at the right time. And so we got his news over a telephone call. We were told that it's pretty amazing when you think about it. We were told several things. Don't Google this because it's going to scare you. We were also told, hear my words, this is not carcinoma, this is sarcoma. So the physician was very clear to help us understand that although those two words sound very similar to those of us in the general public, he wanted to make sure we understood those were very different. And then he told us that the pathology report gave the diagnosis of undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma. So we're sitting with that. And the physician over the phone also said, you need to try to get treatment within 2 weeks. Don't sit on this. You need to go to sarcoma center. Fortunately, we live in an area where there is a hospital within about an hour and a half of us that's a sarcoma center. And there was another one in a neighboring state that he recommended. Unfortunately, that was it.
I want to clarify one thing. When you talk about no diagnostic testing, we're really talking about screening. And so for other cancers, we're always hearing about breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer. There's different mechanisms that they use to screen for those cancers. In sarcoma, we have no screening mechanism. And also, what poses the challenge is the fact that you can get sarcoma anywhere in your body. That is something that we need to make sure that people understand, is that right now, we don't have a screener. We hear often from people in general, but also on this podcast, when they're diagnosed, they're told, don't Google it. Well, what are you supposed to do to get information?
Did you actually not Google it?
Of course we Googled it.
I was like, there's no way.
But interestingly enough, there's two pieces to that. Brandy, I want to speak to what you said, and I appreciate you picking up the word screening and diagnostic. You're right, there's no screening. But even for Don, the diagnostic piece seemed abstract for him because there wasn't a protruding lump or bump. So there wasn't somewhere immediately that they said, let's do a biopsy and see our results and then make a plan. Because I will be honest, do I think that this would have changed Dodd's outcome? Likely not. But there are times that as the mom and as we've walked through this, I will always question, what if we'd had an MRI? What if we had done some treatments first, then our surgery second? That will always be a question. I know that we all made decisions as a family and together because we just weren't going to that worst place. But having that hindsight now, I'm even encouraging people I know, hey, if you have, and I think being young, again, is a challenge. Everybody thinks, oh, you're 24, the likelihood of you having something like this, because otherwise completely healthy young man. But I'm encouraging people now, hey, you've got something going on, push for an MRI. Even if they say, well, insurance might not cover it, keep pushing. Just do it, because I think the potential of results later can just not lead you to second guessing or having these questions that I will always carry now.
People should get the answers to the questions that they have so they can make decisions. I'm glad you brought that up, because you're right. People don't know that. And that's why our discussion guide has a lot of these questions to ask. So I appreciate that you brought up self-advocacy. You made the best decision you could have with the information that you had, which is important to remember, but it's not a bad thing to ask for more information.
And I think another piece to remind people, anytime somebody's telling you you've got a mass on your heart, I mean, that's like, major organ,
alarm bells.
Bells. And I think we were sitting in an emergent situation, but yet Don was stable at this time. And there have been providers and medical professionals that I have really appreciated, because they've just gone, they've taken that nice deep breath for us, and they've said, we want to be methodical about this, and it's hard to do that as a patient and a parent and a caregiver when you're feeling very emergent, because I think we all deal with, if we do this quick. But I would have loved to have had somebody in that moment to look at us and go, okay, let's take a breath. And now let's see, what test have we not done? Or what imaging have we not done? Or if there happens to be a medical professional that listens to this, I began to admire some of the professionals that would look at me and say, I'm not your best person for this. So I'm not going to hold on to you, but I know where to get you. And they did the legwork to get us there quickly. That was the other piece for us after Don got his diagnosis and we were given this, and it was like, here are your two places. Then we were just let go. We had no referral to get us in either of those places. We were given the names of those two places. And again, my biggest thing in this podcast, I don't want to point fingers anywhere, but I think we were so emotional at that point that I didn't realize that, hey, this isn't right. I need your help. Yeah. I know that you can get me in quicker than I can get myself in. And we were just super fortunate that we hung up the phone and we started calling friends, local friends that had used this cancer institute where Don ended up. And we just kept, you talk to one person, they talk to the next. Now, again, it took us longer than I would like to have gotten in, and it doesn't sound long, but all of us in the sarcoma world know. Time matters. Don didn't get in until probably the third week of January. And we're talking, you got to get in, and then you got to get, the first physician we see, we need to get to the next physician. It's just a process. So those are the other things that I think I would love to see the medical community change in that regard. And even in a city, work together. If you're not the place, but you know the place that's in your same city, then physicians have the ability to get in the doors quicker than we do,
Yeah.
oftentimes.
So they on that
Yeah.
phone call said to you, start treatment in 2 weeks, and here's the sarcoma center, and didn't refer, just said, go, this is it, this is the name. That's so incredibly difficult, like you said, and the emotions running high. And I think it's important for listeners to hear that and understand that you can ask for that. That's something you wouldn't have known to do at that time, of course, and unfortunately something that you have to now pass down to somebody else. But to know that you can say, okay, can I have a referral? Or if they aren't going to give you one, reach out to somebody like SFA to help with that. Because like you said, how are you supposed to know to ask for that sort of thing when you have never found yourself in this position before?
And I do think it's important for listeners to know you can reach out to SFA because we
Yeah.
also have connections with all the sarcoma centers.
We learned as we kept living through this, it's super easy to get lost. I don't excuse anything, but I just think sheer numbers in the medical system now, the work overload, and again, we were coming in things at a really interesting time medically, but it's super easy to get lost. And I laugh because I I developed a really loud voice through this process. And I can remember at one point Don looking at me and he goes, okay, mom. Okay, mom. It was like he was trying to temper me at points, but that's where don't let yourself get lost, because it's super easy to get lost because everybody's got a different story and there's so many cancer stories out there. But you just have to keep plugging, and sometimes it's just getting to the right person on the phone. And that's how we finally got into our cancer institute, was actually through a previous patient that was a friend of a friend and then another friend of a friend, and they knew the right people to call. So that's how we got it. We didn't get in by calling the medical institute directly. We got in
Right.
Yeah.
because we called, but
Very
then you're
patient.
just in a switchboard and unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's the way it is.
I love the fact that your voice got louder. I love the fact because that's what you have to. One of the things that you have said that's very important to you is that advocacy. And advocacy means a lot of things. And one of them is that self advocacy, advocating for your loved ones. Someone has to do that. I think people need to understand is it's okay to have a loud voice. It is okay to advocate for your loved one or for yourself. It is okay, even in the medical community. So I love the fact that your voice got loud.
And Don reminded me, okay, mom, you can be loud. Just do it, because this again was who our son is. You can be loud, mom, but do it with kindness, because he knew oftentimes the first person we encountered was going to be able to open the door, but they weren't the person we needed to get to ultimately. He respected what those people were doing, what their jobs were, and that they usually got the front line. And it was the people behind them that really needed to hear the front line.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a great reminder of that for me.
As you were talking, I'm thinking about, as you're saying this from Don's voice of, okay, mom, what I'm thinking too is you had to be his voice often because he's the patient, and you were allowing him, by being that loud voice, you were allowing him to be the patient. And I think that's a really important piece of what you're sharing today, is you're coming from the perspective of somebody's mother, but also their care partner. And a lot of times it is the care partner who has to be that loud voice so that the patient can be the patient. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the experience of not just being a care partner, but being a care partner for your adult child, because you and Don were in this unique situation where he's an adult, but he isn't married. He doesn't have kids. He's 24 years old. His life is just beginning with his career, but you're still his mother and now his caretaker again. So what is it like being the caretaker for an adult child?
Tasha, thank you, because I made some notes. And one of the things I wrote in my notes is all of our stories overlap, right? Every time I've listened to a sarcoma story, no matter age, stage, subtype, I have walked away and I've learned something. I've heard something familiar. And I think the similarities in Don's story with so many of the others I've heard is our family thought, oh, this will never be us, because we had no one in our family that had ever experienced anything like this. Everyone in our family had lived into their 80s. So we thought that typical, this is not us. And he went through the misdiagnosis. But I do think the uniqueness of his story is one, of course, his really lack of major symptoms until it was to a stage of where here's this large tumor, the location of his tumor. But the most unique piece to me is his age. And I think the hardest part about that too is he said, I can remember in the hospital, he did a lot of inpatient treatment. There was no one on the floor that was probably within 20 years of his age, maybe 16. There might have been somebody in their mid 30s. And he talked about that. He brought it up one time when we were inpatient, and we would try to walk and stay active. And you noticed that. He noticed it when we were in the infusion lab. One day he mentioned that. He said, look around, Mom. And I thought he was pointing out something funny. And I kept thinking, what am I supposed to see? And I finally turned to him and said, what is it, Don? I don't see it. And he goes, Mom, nobody in here looks like me. So there's the typical isolation that comes with being a cancer patient. Unfortunately, I feel like his age isolated him even more. So you had that. As a care partner, one of the things that Don wrote about during his cancer journey was the loss of independence. And it was something that his dad and I really talked about. We were trying to give him that, keep that as much as we could. Like you said, Tasha, he had graduated from college the year before. He was in his first year of his career, which he absolutely adored his career. He was living about an hour from us, doing all those things in an apartment with friends, and they're all going doing their big adult life things with the fun of being in their 20s. And suddenly all that is ripped away. His schedule's ripped away from him. He ended up having to move back home about 5 months after his diagnosis. And that was extremely hard, because who at 24 wants to come back home when they had had that opportunity to be away? So that was one of our biggest challenges as a care partner, is honoring his independence, knowing that he ultimately got to make the decisions for his care. That's hard as a parent of someone in this place. He doesn't have that significant other to bounce the ideas off of. So we're listening, and I'm sure there's times that it went through all of our heads. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do this. And we would say some of those things. But honestly, Alan and I tried to sit back and say, Don, what do you want? And then we would bounce things. If he asked and said, hey, what do you think? Then we would try to give our opinion. But I would say, if you are in our situation, I think one of the greatest gifts you can give that person is less is more sometimes, less said, just letting them vent to you. Because if your reaction is enormous, then they're going to pull back. They're not going to feel like they can verbalize and open, and then they're going to question their own decisions. But it was a hard place to be. It is also hard in that Don's 24, and we divided things, and I was trying to manage some of the billing. Talk about another stress level of cancer care. And I would call on a day we might be home or it was quiet or whatever. That's when I would start making the calls. Well, frustratingly enough, they won't talk to you. He's 18. He's over 18. They wouldn't talk to me. So we found out the procedure for that. We were in an emergent situation in that December of 2021. So we had things put in place, like an advance directive, his healthcare power of attorney, all those things. But none of that really falls under billing when you're calling a hospital billing section. So then we found out there's a letter that you need to provide. We type up that letter, we get it sent in. But it was amazing to me the number of times I would call and nobody could seem to find that letter in the system. And then they said, well, just put him on the phone. If you'll just put him on the phone, he can give me permission. Well, this is a young man who's gone through inpatient 7 cycles of chemo and radiation at the same time. He did his simultaneously. So he's had his heart radiated. He's done this chemo, and then they're saying, well, just put him on the phone.
He's not available.
Yeah, but I would have to go wake him up,
Yep.
and say, Don, you just got to tell him it's me. You've just got to tell him.
Yep.
And I'm in this place now of we can do this stuff so much better. We have all these online resources, right? Epic, MyChart, all the those ought to be just one click. But those are some of the challenges. I mean, the challenges is giving him his independence, allowing him to make the decisions, and supporting him to a place that he doesn't begin to second guess himself, because everything else has been taken away from him. So this is a place to still give him that. And then, yes, the challenges of, hey, we're trying to advocate for you, but then half the time I can't get anyone to talk to me. So it was a unique situation, because I think had Don been under 18, I feel like, and this is at no one's fault, but there's so much attention to children, and the even the medical facilities and the children's medical facilities are beautiful. They're energetic, they're bright. Their adult facilities don't have that same energy, and I think that plays a huge mental role for these patients.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to reflect back to you, despite the challenges, what an amazing job you did giving him the space for his independence. And I can't speak for Don, but I think what you've shared about less is more and allowing space for him as the patient to bounce things off of you, especially somebody who, as a child, your parents are just, they're making the decision for you typically. As an adult with a partner, you do have that person, but you don't have that when you are a single adult child and you have your parents. So giving him the space for that, I mean, I can't speak for Dawn, but I know that's what I wanted from my parents when I was in treatment. So I just want to reflect that back to you. And I think that's a really great piece of advice. And you bring up so many of the challenges that I think are very validating as an AYA to hear a parent reflect this as well. Because back to what I just said about as a child, the parent is making the decision for the child. Adult patients, you usually typically are later in life and those decisions are being made with your partner. But as an AYA, you mentioned it's easy to get lost in the system of cancer, the system of sarcoma in general. You get even more lost when you are in this weird age of adulthood, but still now needing your parents' care and they can't get through to your information. That's an extreme challenge that can delay things sometimes. So I completely agree with you that there has to be a better way to do that, because it sounds so silly, like, well, just wake him up and get his sick. That is so difficult. The people who say that have never been through chemotherapy, because that's not the reality of what you can do.
Well, and it's an added piece that we shouldn't have to add.
Right.
It's an
Right.
emotional piece that we're adding that we should never have to add. And I think the uniqueness too of being his age is what, and we continue to find this, and we had to work through this. So if you're in this boat, as if you're a young adult, I encourage you to work through this, because we found that we were both protecting one another. Alan was trying to protect Don, trying to protect me, our two other children, Sarah, Nell, and Harry. I was doing the same. And then poor Don was doing that for all of us. He was trying to protect his siblings. And I remember distinctly at one point, he looked at me and said, please eat. He wasn't able to eat at that point. And as a parent, when your child can't eat, it's the least important thing to you to eat for yourself, even though you understand the benefits and you know you have to take care of yourself. But that was the turning point when we all realized we were overprotecting one another, and we had to find that place of being honest with one another and being okay about that and the emotions that it brings. But that's another piece of being an adult versus a younger child doesn't think to protect. A little bit older of an adult has that one person, but we were all protecting one another, So
Right. It's an incredibly challenging thing to go through as a family. And even thinking about his siblings, being a sibling of somebody going through cancer is also incredibly challenging. And I know from being an older child too, you are thinking very heavily about protecting your siblings from the reality that you're going through. And it really is a family disease. It's a family diagnosis. It's that one person carrying it in their body, but it's the entire family experiencing it. So that's a really honest point that you make there.
Yep.
Everyone's just trying to protect each other in that space.
You mentioned the misdiagnosis, and I know one of them was the ER doctor saying, we think it's this. But there's a second piece to the story in terms of the misdiagnosis. So now you've got the path report back and it says it's UPS and he's going through treatment. At what point do you find out that maybe you've gotten the subtype wrong?
This is another one of those pieces that, I'm still carrying. We're still carrying. Don was at least 18 months into his treatment. And his goal at this point, his goal all along was to have one more open heart surgery, to use these treatments, because he had his first open heart surgery December 21. By early February of 2022, the entire tumor had grown back. So his goal in really attacking this was, hey, I want to have this surgery again, because he had met a surgeon that knew, understood sarcomas, understood cardiac tumors really well. So Don felt great, loved this surgeon. And that was the beauty. He met some amazing people and really became attached to so many people that he met at his cancer institute and just adored them. And this was his goal. He was pushing through these horrible treatments. And then 18 months, we are getting ready. The plan had been for Don to have a second open heart surgery and a craniotomy within a few days of one another, because at this point, Don had a brain tumor now that they were going to remove. Things went awry a little bit, and he had the craniotomy first. We were waiting to get the open heart surgery scheduled, and the physician came in. It was a beautiful moment. I remind people, even in just some of these horrible, horrible things we're going through, they're beautiful moments. And this surgeon came in and said to Don, I never thought I'd see you again. When I met you the first time, I just really never we would get this far. And he said, I want you to hear that, and I want you to take that, because that's a testament to who you are and what you've been doing to get here. And that was a beautiful moment for us as a family and for Don. And I thought that was a beautiful moment for this physician to share that. And then he said, because most angiosarcoma patients, and all of a sudden I remember going, angiosarcoma? It was like my whole body language changed, because you should see the notebooks that I kept through all this. And I had everything. I had every lab, I had every path, I had every imaging, and I would dive back through them. And I thought, angiosarcoma? Nobody's mentioned angiosarcoma. And it was at a moment that I think it just took me by surprise, but it was also at a moment that Don was now nearing, some things were changing for him. He had been in and out of ICU. He was making some pretty significant choices. And I knew just the blow of this surgeon saying we can't do the surgery was enough. So I didn't push that in that moment. But since then, I have learned a lot, because I've been around the Sarcoma Foundation. I've been with you all at many things, most recently in DC for our Hill Day. And it's allowed me to learn and then go, wait a minute, maybe angiosarcoma does make more sense with some of the things that we saw in Don. I guess I just never ever imagined that a pathology report could potentially be inaccurate. But I have learned, and you all know this, we ended up with another sarcoma case in our family through a distant cousin. So it was through learning through Hayden's illness that sometimes UPS and a pathology report can be a metastatic form too, potentially. So I guess I was just learning, wow, a pathology report is not the end all, be all, potentially, that there's more questions that should be asked or could be asked. And then as I relived that, I remember this surgeon was the very first person we met when we first got to the Cancer Institute. And he didn't sugarcoat it. He told told us what we were dealing with, that this is not common, a cardiac tumor is not common, but you've just gone under open heart surgery, the tumor's out. Now we've got to get you to the right oncologist to start treatment. But I remember him saying in that moment, Don, I don't see these often. I see a lot of cardiac tumors, but I don't see sarcoma often in a cardiac form. That's not what we normally see sarcoma as. And he said, you're about one of 10 people I know right now. And he used the word continent with this. And I didn't think early on, I just kept thinking UPS. UPS, is that unusual? But then, like you said, Brandy, we went through all this, and this entire time I was thinking his diagnosis was UPS. And then 8 months into it, I hear the word angiosarcoma. And I've learned a little bit more that probably makes a little bit more sense for Don. I think the question will always be, well, then how can a path report show one thing? But I think that's the difficulties of so many subtypes with sarcoma too, and that we talk about all the time. And there'll always be questions for us, I think, because of that. And
SFA just recently hosted a diagnosis webinar where we talked about this exact issue. A lot of the subtypes are considered ultra rare. And so you have pathologists that have to learn over 100 subtypes. So it's very difficult, even for very expert sarcoma pathologists. But also, we have a lot of people in the sarcoma community that are getting diagnosed not with sarcoma centers, not with a sarcoma pathologist. And that's why it's more important sometimes getting that second opinion from a sarcoma center.
Agreed. And I wonder if somewhere in that 18 months, the team at the Cancer Institute where Don was receiving his treatment, they really started going, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And that somehow we didn't realize that they had come to this new conclusion, because Don did have his tissue samples sent on to do some genetic testing. So they did some real, just beyond the typical pathology report. But it was the first time we had heard the word angiosarcoma. And I think that's what kind of caught me off guard, certainly.
When you heard the term angiosarcoma, this was at a different institution that told you UPS, or was it the same institution?
The open heart surgery was at one institution. The pathology report was a second institution. And then the sarcoma center where Don received all his treatment was a third. But they then retrieved all his tumor samples from the original heart surgery, thank goodness, and sent those on for extensive testing, because they were looking for any type of clinical trial that could benefit. And I think what became a hurdle for Don, his original pathology report already had him at advanced stage. And then Don got ruled out of some things because of how his had spread to the brain. There were already spots in the brain. We were just hitting some things that rule you out of clinical trials. But they were looking for all those things. The Cancer Institute where he was receiving all his treatment was certainly looking for every angle. And I know they were talking, fortunately, outside of their institute with others, which made us feel really good. And Brandy, I think one of the things I've learned too from you all is, you're right, it's so rare, and then yet there's not a centralized place all this information is going. When there is a patient, there's not a centralized place. So it's not somebody seeing it enough to go, aha, or put the pieces together. And so I appreciate when these professionals go from institution to institution and share knowledge and look for, hey, you've seen this, I've seen this. Do we have any similarities with our two patients?
It's very important. And the sarcoma medical community is actually very small. And we know this because we deal with so many, even globally, but it is a very small, tight community, and they do work together. They do communicate, they see each other a lot, and they collaborate a lot. They share information, they reach out to each other.
As we went through this, that's another way that you can get lost. You're just, hey, I'm making this treatment, I'm making this day, I'm doing all these goals for myself, and you're not thinking, hey, has anything changed? Do we need to ask questions? Can we go back over my diagnosis? I would have never thought to do that. But there were a couple of times that all of a sudden one provider would say something and we would look at each other like, have you heard that before? And you would just realize that oftentimes, I think in tumor boards, they're all sharing the information together, but it's not coming back to you because I'll be honest, we quit reading the my chart. We didn't look up every result because emotionally that was not a good place to be. We wanted to live in our days, and if you're doing that every day, that can have its own adverse effects, so to me the
Absolutely.
conversation was better with our providers, but it was interesting how some things would come out and we would realize, hey, they had that conversation as a tumor board, but we're not sitting in that tumor board. So it's interesting how everything's moving behind the scenes a lot of times, but you're not hearing it. And if it's not reviewed on a regular basis where you go, hey, is there anything else? Can we review my diagnosis? Can we review my plan? Can we? And it's exhausting to do that, I'll be honest, but I think that's a really good practice. I think it's too much often for the patient, but I think an advocate has to be that person that almost puts it on their timeline.
It is a really good piece of advice, not just for the reasons that you say of revisiting your care plan and your diagnosis, but because throughout this entire journey, you are experiencing different emotions and hear different things at different times. So even if it is something that was said to you in the beginning, you may hear it, actually internalize it later when you revisit that conversation. So it is good practice, not just to catch information that could fall through the cracks, but also to revisit your understanding of your care plan, of your diagnosis, of what's happening, of something that may have been said and should be revisited anyway. It is a really good practice, I think, from the time of diagnosis, even into survivorship in some cases. Some things that are talked about in the very beginning of treatment, should you finish treatment, you do need to revisit later and may have forgotten about because treatment's over. So I think no matter where you are in the journey, that is very, very solid advice to any care partner and patient.
I know we had an experience that Don went down to have just a procedure done to kind of check and explain some of his eating issues. And we got down to have that. And then they would not put him to sleep because there was the concern, of course, we're a tumor location. And that was very emotional too. And then the doctors that were there had never seen Don before. And they start telling us things that we had not heard from our care team. And I'll be honest, that's one of those moments that mom got really loud and Don is calm. It just blew my mind. Calm as he could be, looked at me and he goes, they're inaccurate. He said it in front of them. I've got 4 physicians. And he said, no, Mom, that's inaccurate. And I said, well, why are, because I looked at them and said, I can't believe, because it was not good news they were sharing. And I said, if you know this, why is our primary care team not shared this with us? It was really alarming. And Don very calmly just said, that's inaccurate. And he felt very confident about his primary oncologist he was seeing. So guess what? We go back up to the room and I'm hot and he's calm. And I said, I need to talk to somebody. Well, sure enough, his primary oncologist calls and he gets on the phone and he goes, I don't think they're right because you told me this and this and they talked through everything. And she goes, you're exactly right, Don. That was not accurate based on. So also be careful because there's these moments of somebody's giving you information, and it happened to us more than once because you're starting to see people that never started with you really don't know your case. They know your case that point in time. And the number of times we would get different information from different providers and could send us in a place we didn't need to go. That's always interesting too.
It's an incredible challenge of self-advocacy. And I think the example you give of Don saying that's not right is very powerful because that's his patient education coming into play there, saying, no, I know what my care team has told me. This team doesn't know me well. And I think as a patient in a journey like a sarcoma journey, you do have to parse that out sometimes because, I mean, great example, most sarcoma patients probably end up in the ER at some point with a neutropenic fever or a complication throughout their journey. And those people in the ER have never seen you before. They don't know your journey. And you have to be able to speak up and say, this is my history, or your care partner, somebody and share these things with you. Yes, they have your chart, but they don't have the knowledge that your team has given you. And that is a huge challenge of self-advocacy, but it's important because it's very easy to get sucked into a hole of, wait, this is not what I've discussed, and this is scary information, and it's also not true. And you have to be able to go back to your team and say, I was told this. Is that right? I was correct in thinking it's not right, and be confident in how you move forward. And I think Dawn is a good example there. But also your feelings are also valid, because you're supposed to trust the medical professional. So what if they're saying to you, oh, this is it? Of course you're going to say, wait a minute, no one's talked to us about this. I need to talk to somebody. And you should question that. But it does just speak to the importance of understanding your care, knowing who to go to for the best information for you, and knowing when to say, no, that's not for me. That's incorrect. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I think it's another example of how easy it can be to get lost. I wish there were cancer institutes that the ER was nothing but your cancer team, too. You didn't go back into an ER of a general hospital because that was miserable. And it usually takes you down a whole different road. I think if you're a cancer patient, especially in certain levels, I think you shouldn't even have to. You should be able to bypass that type of ER and go directly to a cancer critical care unit, because half of this process is emotional, if not more sometimes. And we're not setting our patients up to be really in a great emotional state when we then take them down the whole physical road of what we've got to do to their bodies to help them combat this. That's a big piece. I now volunteer at the Cancer Institute. We're done. I now volunteer there, and I keep saying holistic approach. And it's been neat to see some changes that have started happening, but it's not. Unfortunately, I think we've become very segmented because everybody's specialized, but we're forgetting the whole piece of this person. You've got to have both of those talking, and it doesn't happen.
There's no real quarterback on the team that says, okay, I'm bringing all of this together. I'm looking at all this. I'm having a conversation. It's interesting to hear, as you said earlier, that so many things about these stories are similar yet unique. There's certain similarities in the sense that are overarching themes, but each one is also very unique. And it's very unique on how patients and their families and their loved ones move through these journeys together and make those kind of decisions. But I do love the theme of it's easy to get lost, because I think that is truly a through line that anyone who's been diagnosed with sarcoma has felt lost, even from not even knowing the word sarcoma and thinking, what is that? And then being told, don't Google it.
All Googled it separately. Like we didn't want the, it was so funny. The three of us went separate. It was like, okay. And then of course we all knew we Googled it. But yeah, we all went off to our corners and Googled it. And he was right. It was horrifying, honestly, when we Googled it, because it let us know what we were really dealing with. And I don't think we would have known that otherwise.
I have another question about after the tumor was initially removed and then it grew back rather quickly. Was there a conversation about it growing back?
My guess is that because of the location of this tumor being that they could not get clear margins, or they did not get clear margins. But they told us the word aggressive, and Don's oncologist said, I don't like using this word. I rarely want to use this word, but I'm being honest with you. This is aggressive. What you've got is aggressive, because at Don's diagnosis, initially they told us it was in this left atrium. When they finally did a PET scan, when we got to the Cancer Institute, we see the area of the heart, we see an area in the hip, and then a day later they called him back, because then the next person reads, right? Because you get a preliminary reading and you get a next reading. And then they called him back and said, you need to come back up here. And the spots were in the brain at that point too. So when Don started, Don was at a place of hip, heart, brain. We were already dealing hip, spine too. So very advanced, as they say. And the word aggressive was used. And that's where Don had so much confidence in this next cardiothoracic surgeon, because he was well known and it was very familiar with what we were dealing with. And that was the goal, to get there.
As you mentioned, you volunteer at the Cancer Center and really trying to create some important change there while also supporting other people going through a cancer journey. And you also advocated with us on Capitol Hill this year
I did.
and used your voice to advocate on behalf of other people in the sarcoma community. Can you talk about that experience and how you've decided to honor Don's legacy? Because I also know that you all did a run as well to honor his legacy.
You're going to love this whole story. In a perfect world, to me, someone walks in an institution, they've got a sarcoma diagnosis, okay? Especially a young adult that's going to need a little extra advocating, I feel like, because they're that group that's kind of don't have mom and dad or don't have a spouse. So they walk into this world, and you go in a sarcoma center, and all of a sudden you're assigned a patient advocate, a patient navigator, somebody that is that quarterback that walks with you from day one. From day one, they're walking, they're living this with you. Because again, what we've spoken to is you get lost. You get too many different physicians. We had a social worker on every floor, so we didn't have a consistent person. At that time, this institute didn't have patient navigators or patient advocates. And that's where my passion is now. We didn't know about the Sarcoma Foundation. Why doesn't a sarcoma center hospital, I don't care if it's just a leaflet, just something saying, here are your sarcoma resources? Because we Googled once and then we kind of quit Googling because we were overwhelmed of just figuring out how to live through this. So that's my perfect world. So you're getting those resources immediately. You're also assigned somebody that is your emotional care team. We were working hard to get that. That's that holistic approach that I think all these pieces play in the success of a patient. We couldn't find that support in the way we needed it in our cancer institute. I went outside of our cancer institute and found someone that I knew. I just knew he was good at this. Reached out to him personally, and he said, tell me what time to be at the hospital. He went straight to Don's room. And he is the person that told us about the Sarcoma Foundation because we did something for him and he would not accept a monetary gift we gave him. And he asked a fellow colleague who happened to be in the medical world who's doing sarcoma research. And that individual said, the one I know about that I feel good about is the Sarcoma Foundation. So this counselor wrote us a note, thanked us, and he goes, but I want you to know this is where this monetary gift went. First time I'd ever heard of the Sarcoma Foundation. So Brandy, that's how we looked up, found out about the Race to Cure Sarcoma. Our community here is phenomenal. We have an amazing community and group of friends, and they'd been asking us constantly, what can we do? So Don's sister and I looked at Don and said, what do you think about doing a race or a walk right here? We have one in our large city, but how about right here in our community? And what we saw that it did is, one, it wasn't about Don anymore for him. And I think every cancer patient needs that. They're ready to not be about them. They don't want to talk about them. So it did that for him. But our community, who had not heard the word sarcoma, who always thought a yellow ribbon meant somebody was coming home from military service. We made it super simple because we just kind of threw this together pretty quickly through an amazing friend group and had this walk, and it was beautiful. Don was really struggling with mobility then. I didn't think he would be able to walk. I prepared everybody for that. He walked the entire walk. He went out to lunch with friends. His dad and I went out with a different group of friends, watching what it did for him, for our community. And then the beauty of it was what it ended up doing for the sarcoma community. So that's the first we had heard of Sarcoma Foundation. That was how we got involved in the race. And then I just kept following you guys and kept hearing about Hill Day. Wanted to go the first year, just emotionally couldn't pull it off the first year. And so I told myself this year, I'm going to be there because my quote has been, I want to be the audible voice for my son's inaudible voice. And that's my motto. And that's where I'll stay with the Sarcoma Foundation. That is my goal in figuring out how to become a patient advocate, even at the grassroots level here, because I think we can do it so much better. There's so many ways we can do this better, but it's going to take the small things. Like when you walk in the door, you don't wait to just out of ironic moment hear about Sarcoma Foundation. When you're diagnosed with sarcoma, here are your resources. And I think we can do that. I firmly believe we're the audible voice for those that are inaudible now.
I love that phrase. That is something I'm writing down. Be the audible voice for the inaudible voices, which I think is beautiful in so many ways. One, I've told you this over and over again, but every time we talk, I feel like I know Don more, and I truly feel like you encapsulate his voice, having never met him. But also that totally captures carrying his legacy forward, and it takes our voices being loud, being that loud Julie Harp mama bear voice to say that we need to be loud to make this change. And it's possible, but we have to be audible and we have to do it together. And I think, what a amazing opportunity you took to be that audible voice this past year and continue to be. I wonder if you could share a little for people who are listening to this and maybe want to get involved and aren't sure what the experience is like. Could you talk a little bit about what that was like for you and what you took away from it?
It was amazing to me. It was a great blend. It was exhausting. Let's start there. It was exhausting. You need to know that.
Advocacy is hard work.
It is hard work. It's exhausting. DC is hot in July, and I am from the South, so I'm used to hot, but it was still hot. The initial thing was when I walked in the room, and it's that walking in the room for the first time. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any faces yet, really. And I walked in that room, and it was like, I'm not alone. I think that's what it was. It finally put for me, these are the faces, these are the people, I'm not alone. And they are as passionate. Everybody was equally passionate. Everybody had their story. And I appreciated that we all honored each other's stories. And when we sat in the offices of the different legislators and we sat with their teams, and we went around our table and shared our stories. I was sitting by a mom, and she and I had not yet met. I shared my story, and I turn around and she shares hers, and she's a mom of a son that she lost to osteosarcoma, and she lives 45 minutes from me. And it was, again, that we're not alone. And the young man across the table from us, he was a sibling who lost his brother. And guess what? He lived an hour from us. So it was just the immediate community. And then I met people that live states away, and we're still staying in touch. It's hard to go to Washington because there's frustration, right? Let's be honest. And you do feel like, am I being heard? And there were moments that, it was frustrating. But I walked away from Hill Day and I said, at least we were audible. All I can, because if I just sit back and get defeated, I'm doing nothing. Some of the offices we went in were warm and receptive, some not so much, I'll be honest. I felt like, hey, it was empowering. I was not alone. It felt good. I have now formed friendships that I will carry that I would have never formed before. Second day, the education day, my brain, it was like that little emoji where your brain's just exploding. That's how I felt, but it was a good feel. It made me, that's where I started thinking, okay, angiosarcoma makes more sense because of some of the conversations there. It helped me understand why this might make sense or why this might make sense. And it helped me learn the challenges that we have before us. It was just a good weekend. I think it's hard to make that step because you've got to travel. You've got to block out the time. It's hot, but I'll do it. It's on my calendar now. It's part of who I am. My community was great because a lot of them knew I was going. They wanted to hear all about it. I will be more prepared next year because now I'm reaching out to my legislators beforehand to hopefully take some of that off of you all as the staff member of Sarcoma Foundation too, because then I'm going to make sure I get in some of those offices I didn't get in this past year. Great
And
experience.
we love that. We love that you've gone and you've experienced it and you have the confidence now to take that into your hands and continue that relationship. Because
Yeah.
again, that's us empowering people. And that's what we want, is to empower people, because you're right. Sometimes it does feel like walking those offices. Are we making a difference? But we are. And we did. Because some of the things that we were advocating for on the Hill right now is a point of tension that what's happening with right now, and people are fighting for access to the healthcare, that we went up there and told them how important it was. And we talked to them about challenges with insurance and the different effect that it has on rare cancers. And they don't often hear that, because they don't hear from rare cancer groups very often, because oftentimes we're so small, it's hard to pull people together. So if there's 20 people, if there's 100 people, we're all making a difference. And
Yeah.
no one can tell your story. No one can be Dawn's voice like you can.
Yeah.
No one can share Dawn's experience and your experience like you can. And they need to hear what is really happening, the real effects of what's really happening. And I want to mention, I mentioned this to Julie before we started recording, but I want to mention on the podcast, those of you listening can't see, we're on video so we can see each other. But Julie also gave us really pretty yellow bracelets while we were there. And I put mine on that day. Oh, I'm going to get emotional about it. I put mine on that day and I have not taken it off since. And I mentioned to Julie that there was someone else there, Denise, that was there that day. And I just saw her recently at a meeting, and she put hers on that day and hasn't taken it off since either. And so I look at this. Actually, I just looked at it yesterday, and I looked down at it and I thought, this is something, a visual that connects us and reminds us, while it might seem like a bracelet, it's a visual to me that connects us to why we do what we do, but it connects us to each other. As you said, walking in that room and finding a community of people. That's what it's about. It's that community of people and knowing you're not alone. And so I look at this bracelet often, and it reminds me of why I work so hard at SFA, why I'm so passionate, but also the connection that I have to so many other people. So thank you for this bracelet. It's beautiful and it's meaningful, and I don't plan to take it off.
Oh, thank you. It is nice to have connections, and it's nice to have those tangible pieces that remind us of that sometimes, when I think sometimes we can be overwhelmed, and without a tangible thing, sometimes we forget, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do.
I think one of the great things to advocate for too with your treatment team, Don was very well aware of the terminal. His diagnosis was terminal early on. He knew he was given a very short time frame. He well outlived that. Brag, 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 mom here. But he knew that, and yet he didn't want to share that. I think there were people that kept wanting him to do a social media page and a blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not our Don, because he's never drawn attention to himself. And there's privacy that's needed when you have a diagnosis. I think that people that aren't going through a diagnosis don't realize that sometimes, that there's a need to encapsulate that and hold it. But I do think you can advocate as a patient. He did tell his care team, I've got this friend getting married. I'm in his wedding on this date. I've got this friend getting married. I'm in his wedding on this date. I got this friend getting married. I'm in his wedding on this date. He pushed hard. He didn't get to make everything. He had to pick and choose, but he made most everything. He worked hard to make those dates. His care team worked really hard to try to finagle some treatments so that he might feel a little better. Don never quit living. He lived through his 2-year journey. And I think that's important. And I think that's what kept him in a great place. So advocate for that, because sometimes care team's not thinking how much energy that can bring you, that can actually put you in a better place for your next treatment. Or, yeah, I know we shouldn't postpone, but can we push it a week so I can go to this? So that was a big piece, and that brought him great joy. And I think ultimately helped him through some of the toughest moments was, okay, I've got this that I'm going to make it for, or I got to do this. So now I'm okay of being isolated for the next 3 weeks. So advocate for those life moments that you want to be a part of.
I think that's really good advice. We've actually talked a little bit about this on another episode of sharing your quality of life goals. That's a very clinical way to put the beautiful terminology you just shared. But I do think that's very important for patients to understand, is that your quality of life goals for yourself matter. And it's a huge thing to advocate for with your team. So what a beautiful message to share to people, and how Dawn did that and kept living. And I think you're right. I think it does provide energy to the patient to continue moving through treatments, no matter where their journey ends up. It does provide you the space and the motivation to keep doing what you need to do while you move through your diagnosis. So thank you for bringing that up. And it actually kind of relates to my last question. What's the one message you want to leave with listeners today?
I think the biggest message that came about for our family is there's always beauty. There's always beauty in some of those toughest moments. There's always beauty. And when you can look for that, you have to be intentional. But even in these sarcoma stories, there's beauty. Don found that when he made his choice to come home, because he was running out of options, and he decided he was going to live on his terms. And when he came home, those were some of the most beautiful days that our family experienced. He played Santa Don. It was again in December, and he decided to be Santa Don. And he took that time and he played Santa Don, and he had all of us wrapping presents and delivering them to the people he wanted to make sure understood their impact on his life. And so there's always goodness. Did Don's story end the way we wanted it to? No, but there was beauty in every moment of his story. And that's what we're intentional about now, is sharing that beauty. And so that's the message. There's beauty there. Don't be quiet, advocate, find the voice, and we're going to make some changes for other people.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for sharing that. And that was kind of a trick question, because I do have one more question for you. But I know you've talked about community and not being alone and finding other people out there who share this sarcoma experience with you. So I'm sure people listening today, what you've said has resonated. If they do want to connect with you, where would the best place for them to do that be?
Actually, my email, I shared that.
We will link that in our show notes.
Okay.
So Julie's email, check on the show notes. Yep.
Or our Instagram works too.
And we'll link your handle to Instagram as well in the show notes also.
Great.
To make it easy for everyone. But oh, Julie, it is always a joy to talk to you. I said before. Yeah, you too. I feel like we could talk all day. So I do appreciate you. No, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's just so easy to talk to you and have these conversations. So thank you for setting aside the time to talk today. And I'm so looking forward to all we continue to accomplish together as you continue to be Dawn's audible voice in the world.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us today. Did this episode resonate with you? You can join the discussion about this episode in our Sarcoma Stories Facebook group, linked in the show notes. If you found this podcast helpful, your feedback is incredibly valuable and helps to create more awareness about sarcoma while sharing vital resources with someone who may need it. Be sure to leave a rating and review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. SFA created Sarcoma Stories to highlight the individual stories of sarcoma patients, survivors, and care partners. To amplify the many stories we consistently hear and bring together the broad range of lived experiences of sarcoma patients, SFA has also created a Sarcoma Journey survey. This survey is vitally important as we need to collect data for sarcoma subtypes to help advance research and effective treatments and put data to the stories we consistently hear. To learn more about this survey and to take the survey yourself, please head to the show notes and you'll find the survey link.